I'm going to load up the deck.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Reading League California's event with Sharon Vaughn. Thanks so much for being here tonight. I'm Sharon Dunn, the president of Reading League California. And as always, we like to state our mission. Our mission at the Reading League California is to promote an awareness, understanding, and use of evidence-aligned literacy instructional practices and curriculum in California based on the science of reading. Each month, we offer an event to support our membership, either in the form of professional learning opportunity like tonight, yay, or in a membership meeting. It is such a wonderful community to share resources and support, and we appreciate your partnership in this very important work that we have before us in California. Now I'll turn it over to Leslie Zaroya, our VP of Events, to run through a few announcements and introduce tonight's guest speaker.
Hi, thanks, Sharon. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Just a couple of updates. So, we are still talking about AB 1121. It is still alive. Yay, for now. And going through all our processes in Sacramento. So, in case you don't know about AB 1121, the bill has two important elements. And the first, what you see on the screen here, is providing paid professional learning and structured literacy in the science of reading, and we really need this in California. This is something that folks have been struggling with. The second part, if you flip to the next slide there, is to provide a list of vetted supplemental materials for teachers to use to teach reading more effectively. So we know that our ELA and ELD adoption is not coming for a while. We've got a couple of years, and so this is really needed in California that we would be able to get a list of vetted materials for folks to use. Because it's one thing to get the training, but if you have no materials to use, it's really difficult to implement. So if you are so inclined, please go to the californiakidsread.org and sign the petition. Kristen, will you go to the next slide for me? Yeah, so californiakidsread.org is an organization that is helping us to advocate for this work. And if you go to this website, there is an area there where you see the arrow to sign the petition. If you have not done so already, please do that because it's really important for our students in California. And we need to hear from real practitioners out in the field doing this work. That's who legislators want to hear from. They want to hear from teachers. They don't care what we say. They want to know what the people on the ground think about this bill. So take a moment and sign the petition if you are so inclined. And then I also wanted to share on the next slide, there are some really great data sheets that they have prepared about students who need this work the most, especially our Black students and Hispanic students. And there's also a great two-pager on the bill on the far right there. These are all in our shared folder for tonight, so feel free to go in there. Click on them, save them, download them to your computer, share them with others. And then one little click there, Kristen. Whoop, back one. There should have been a click on the slide. Was there not one? So EdVoice has also created a short Google form. Oh, interesting. That didn't come up. I'll put the link in the chat where you can share a testimonial. So we've had 900 teachers share a testimonial in this short little Google form that I'll put in the chat in a minute. So if you have not done that and you feel compelled to share like how it's really going in your classroom and the impact that structured literacy has had on your kids or your own teaching career, they would love to be able to support you with that. So and read and hear from you. So I'll go ahead and put that in the chat in a second. Okay, but now let's get into the heart of why we're here tonight and why you showed up on a Thursday night at 6:30. So we are here to welcome our guest for the evening, Dr. Sharon Vaughn. Sharon is the executive director at the Meadows Center for Preventing Educational Risk at the University of Texas at Austin. And she just got an award this week, you guys. I went on the website earlier to look up her bio. And I was like, oh my God, just on Monday, she got this big award. She was recognized as the 2025 Research Impact Award recipient for all
Wow.
of her amazing contributions to the field. So congratulations on that, Dr. Vaughn. And thank you so much for taking your time to be with us tonight. We really appreciate your time and expertise, and I'm excited for this topic. I really want to know, how do we combat misinformation? What can we learn and what can we say as folks are dealing with these kinds of misunderstandings around the science of reading?
Okay, great. Thank you, Leslie, for that shout out. And can you see my slides okay?
We can't see them. Are you sharing your screen?
Well, I was, so
Try
here
it
we
again.
are.
Let's technology.
Mhm. Well, let's see. Mhm.
And we've got guests all over the place tonight. Minnesota.
So share. It might not have taken it when you were talking for some
Yeah,
reason.
maybe it didn't. There
It
we go.
didn't,
Now we can see it.
yeah,
That
yeah.
Yay.
looks great.
It didn't want to interfere with your voice, and that was wise of my slides. I want to thank the California Reading League. I want to thank the entire Reading League around the country for the amazing work they do. They have literally been the voice and fuel behind the science of reading. We are all grateful to them. And that's why I'm here to show my appreciation. I also want to make a shout out if you're looking for somebody really smart who knows the science of reading in California. I want to give a shout out to my friend and colleague, Dr. Michael Solis, who's at the University of California, Riverside. So if there's any questions tonight that I don't get to or that you don't like my answer, go to him. He'll give you a better one. I'm going to talk about misunderstandings of dyslexia and the science of reading. And I wrote this piece actually for the Reading League. So if you go to the Reading League's journal, you'll see a really nice example of this piece that I wrote with my colleague Nathan Clemens. And we wrote it to just sort of expose not just the science of reading movement, but also to kind of talk about the way the science of reading has been misunderstood and misapplied, not by the Reading League, they are perfect, but by many other people. So we know that this science of reading movement really started because test scores in the United States alarmed people, as they should. The popular media picked up on the fact that too many students, as many as 40%, and in some large school districts, 60%, were not acquiring proficiency in reading. Inexcusable. This idea of teaching reading became pushed to the forefront. And we have this increased interest in using evidence-based practices for teaching reading or the science of reading. And teachers began to question the validity of their practices, began to wonder if there's something about what they were doing that was not aligned to the science of reading. So if there's teachers out there in the audience, I want to tell you that I admire you because if you don't know the science of reading, it's not your fault. Many training institutions have lacked either the knowledge, skills, or will to provide you with the science of reading, but we're getting changes. And it sounds like there's some changes in California. So we know that there are so many benefits to the science of reading and that we get this both increased awareness of reading, we get changes in the legislation, we get changes in state approved curricula, which provides some instructional guidelines for teachers. It also has influenced curriculum publishers. Publishers now know about the science of reading and they know about the Reading League and they pay attention to what you say because it will, we should not assume publishers want to do the wrong thing. They don't try to develop materials that are bad. They try to develop materials that are responsive to an audience. And so now that the audience is saying we want to be part of the science of reading, my observation is publishers say we want to help with materials and resources for that. So why do we have these misconceptions and why are they problematic? Here's the most important one. If we do not correct these misconceptions, teachers may stop using practices or materials because they were taught that they were part of the science of reading when they are incorrect. And if they are not research-based and we create mandates or we codify in curricula false ideas, we might undermine teachers' confidence in scientific findings. They may say, well, wait a minute, somebody told me this was the science of reading, it didn't work. They may lose the will to continue. So what becomes sort of accepted practice can, like before, lack empirical support. And we sure don't want to go back there. So this all could lead to a negative impact on schools, on teachers, and on families. So we really have to correct these misconceptions. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to organize some of the big ones. And as I do this, you jump on me. Sharon Dunn was at the Reading League National Conference. I did this presentation. If I didn't get something exactly right, she had her hand up and was clarifying, and I was really grateful to that. So the first point I want to clarify is, does the science of reading refer to a particular program or a specific pedagogy? So people say, for example, my program is the science of reading. Wrong. That is not correct. The science of reading is not a package. It's not a specific pedagogy. You can't say things like, we are the science of reading, or we're a science of reading district. Now, what you can do is you can implement programs and practices aligned with the science of reading. You can purchase curriculum and materials and resources aligned with the science of reading. So the science of reading has a set of premises and underpinnings that can be used to inform what it is we develop and do. So we know that effective reading instruction is based on the science of reading. It's not a particular program. It's not a curriculum, but it includes a connection between the science of reading, professional development, and curriculum. It's all connected. Screening and progress monitoring are part of the science of reading. Teacher knowledge and understanding about how reading skill develops, and practices and strategies supported by evidence. So, clarification number 2. Many people will say, I don't think the Reading League people would ever say this, but they say, learning to read is a natural process. We don't need to rely on the science of reading. Most children will just learn to read without our help. Now, here's the thing. Thank goodness some kids learn to read without our help, because then we'd have no readers. But all students benefit from the science of reading. So learning to read is a natural process. No. If we expose students to a lot of books and read to them a lot, they'll figure it out. No, that is not a useful premise for understanding. However, learning language, oral language, is a natural process, not reading. I don't have time to unpack this for you, but the neuropsychological scientific findings on this are quite strong. Learning to read is not natural. Learning to read does not occur by simply being exposed. It's not like language. Language you do get that way. If people say, well, my kid learned to speak by the time they were 2, they were just around a lot. That's true. It's why if you bring a child up in France with French-speaking people, they learn French. You do learn the language around you that you're exposed to. Reading is not that same way. Research shows students learn to read when they're provided explicit and systematic cumulative instruction in the alphabetic code, often thought of as phonics, and learned how to apply this code to words. They're taught vocabulary and oral language. They're given opportunities, so practice reading and complex text, and they provide opportunities to practice with support and feedback from the teacher. So, not natural. Clarification number 3. Won't all children just learn to read if we wait long enough? I have been hearing that for 30 years. I consider that a long enough wait. The answer is no. Children will not learn to read if we just give them more time, if we wait longer and let them catch on. Learning to read is not automatic. Some students will learn quickly. That is true. However, using these evidence-based science of reading practices ensures all students will read faster and with less stress. Science of reading isn't for dyslexia. It's not just for those students who are behind, although, my gosh, it's necessary for them, but all students benefit. So don't let people say to you that science of reading is for those kids. No, it's for all learners. Has the science of reading established that there's only one effective way to teach reading? I hear this all the time. If we don't teach in that prescribed manner, students won't learn. There's a specific scope and sequence. That is not accurate. There are many effective ways to implement the science of reading. There are some necessary, fundamental core building blocks. Students need an organized approach that includes the alphabetic principle, meaning sounds mapped to print, learning how to read words, word meaning, and accessing increasingly complex texts. Absolutely. Differentiating instruction for the range of learners, using a set of practice and a strong curriculum aligned with the science of reading will not automatically ensure that students learn to read. They need adults who understand this well-organized structure. So, does the science of reading say most of research reading instruction should focus on phonics? That's the other thing I hear is pushback. Oh, we don't want to do science of reading because it's only phonics. It's all about teaching phonics. It's not about anything else. Oh my gosh, these people are exhausting me. No, most reading instruction, of course, should not focus on phonics. We don't have 80% of reading instruction on phonics. That is not what the science of reading says. However, phonics instruction is fundamental and central to the science of reading movement. And the reason it is because there's been this long-standing and unnecessary debate over phonics, often referred to as the reading wars. Many educators, through no fault of their own, are unprepared to teach phonics. And it's because of this ongoing and rather nauseating argument about whether or not phonics is associated with improved outcomes. So it has often been neglected. How many of you out there have heard of balanced reading? Oh my gosh. When balanced literacy or balanced reading first came out, it was right-minded. The idea is that the balance meant you would teach the right amount of phonics, the right amount of fluency, the right amount of vocabulary, the right amount of comprehension based on children's needs. It was not a bad idea. However, we managed to completely wreck it. Most of what is done in the name of balanced literacy is anything but balanced. It usually, unfortunately, does not include adequate attention to phonics and word reading. And so for this reason, the science of reading movement has sort of pulled in a push around phonics, not because the science of reading says that's all that's important, but because it was so overlooked. So decades of research shows that phonics instruction is necessary. However, it isn't the only component of reading instruction. We all know background knowledge, things like vocabulary and fluency play a big role. And it's not even the majority of reading instruction, meaning more than 50%. Curriculum developers may have overly weighted materials towards phonics, but often it's because they had attended to it previously. So, ready for misconception number 6? Does the science of reading say picture should never be used in reading instruction? I've heard this many times. Pictures are terrible. So this is a misconception about pictures. Let me explain what you should be looking for with pictures. The problem has been when pictures are used to decode words. That's a no. We don't use pictures to decode words. We use what we know about the alphabetic principle or phonics to decode words. Pictures can be an enormous asset in engaging students to read a text. So for example, you have a cover of a book and it has some pictures on it. Should we take all those pictures off of those books? No. Pictures can pull students in. They can get students to think about text. They can be engaging. They just aren't used or should not be used to read words. Effective reading instruction targets the application of the alphabetic code to read words. Pictures are used to promote engagement with the story, not word reading. They can also be used to promote comprehension. It may help students visualize what's happening, verify understanding, and use to ask and answer questions about inferences, discussion, or connecting knowledge and feelings, not word reading or phrase reading. So I've heard people say, I don't want my young students to have books with pictures in them because it won't teach them to read. Mwah, bad idea. Okay, what is the role of comprehension in the science of reading? I hear this all the time. People, it's back to that previous misunderstanding. All of the science of reading is about phonics. Why is comprehension so rarely the focus of debate around the science of reading? Oh, goodness gracious, this is exhausting. There has been considerable disagreement about the inclusion of phonemic awareness and phonics in reading instruction. That's a fact. This debate has been going on, and this pushback has been going on. So that when the science of reading got trajectory, it ended up focusing quite a bit on phonemic awareness and phonics. It was necessary in order to get a breakthrough in terms of implementing the science of reading. It was necessary to build these foundation skills. There's no argument. No one in the science of reading thinks that reading comprehension is anything other than the desired outcome of reading. Science of reading doesn't say, we don't want people to understand what they read. We only want them to read the words. Nonsense. Comprehension, understanding, and learning from text is an important part of the science of reading. But you can't understand what you can't read. So you really do have to get through the code. All right, let me pause for a second, just because every time I give this talk about the science of reading, I get myself all excited about some of the silly and difficult things that have been happening over the years. Let me just pause for a second, and Leslie and Sharon and Michael, anyone else, are there any comments or questions in the chat that we should look at?
There's a question in the chat about addressing where morphology fits into science of reading. It says, too many people think that morphology is only for advanced readers when morphology instruction is supported with research that it assists even the beginning level readers.
Yeah, so morphology is part of the science of reading. Morphology is not disconnected from the science of reading. Morphology is about the parts of words that carry meaning. So, for example, in a word like friendless, the word friend and the suffix less carry meaning. So if you don't understand that the parts of words carry meaning and you don't know how to read those parts of words, your reading comprehension will be compromised. And teaching morphology advances students' success as readers and therefore is a critical component of the science of reading. Morphology instruction can fit both under the phonics or foundation skills as well as the vocabulary learning. So yes, ma'am, Tracy, to everyone, morphology is an important aspect of the science of reading. Any other questions or comments that would be worth addressing before I continue? And please
Nope,
jump in.
there's nothing else right now in the chat.
Okay. Well, Leslie, tell people to put questions and comments in the chat because I
Okay.
enjoyed hearing from all of you.
Yeah, feel free to put questions or comments in the chat.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate that, Leslie. But Leslie, who, by the way, is sacrificing her evening with her grandchildren just to be with us. I'm just sacrificing my evening with myself, and that's enough. But I'm really thrilled to be here with you all. Does the science of reading say decodable texts are a necessary part of instruction? Boy, this is another argument that I've gotten into quite a bit. Decodable texts are a necessary part of reading instruction is a misconception. Now, first, let's clarify. What are decodable texts? Decodable texts are when a high proportion of words, or maybe all of them, are phonetically regular, meaning they are represent the sounds of the language as you have been taught them, and you can apply these sounds to decoding the word, or patterns or morphological units that you have learned. So a high proportion of words are phonetically regular, or the patterns are ones that you know. The assumption is that students should be able to read the words because you've been taught the phonics elements. So that's what a decodable text is. For very beginning readers, decodable texts are wonderful. They love Max the cat because they can read Max the cat because they've been taught all the sounds that go with it. It's fun and exciting for beginning readers. However, a steady and continuous diet of decodable text over time after students acquire proficiency is a bad idea because students need to learn a wide range of text genres. So, beginning readers, decodable text, good idea. Only decodable text for years, bad idea. So, does science of reading say that these decodable texts are a necessary part of instruction? And what evidence do we have? There's actually little evidence that decodable text is superior to authentic text. However, what we know is that decodable texts are most effective with beginning readers, but they should be faded, just like I said. Students need practice with many text types and more. I don't really like the word authentic text. In fact, can we just pretend that word isn't there? I'll tell you why. What text isn't authentic? I mean, if it's written down and it's readable, let's just call it, authentic text. But many text types are necessary to expose students to increased vocabulary, syntax, and background knowledge. Now, this clarification number 8 about decodable text usually brings out some questions. So pour them on or comments, just make sure they're polite in the chat. Thank you. I'll go to the clarification number 9 while you're doing that. Clarification number 9 says, does the science of reading say leveled text should never be used? We all know that we have gone through this period for the last 15 years where leveled text reigned supreme. Students were provided a small little reading test. Based on this reading test, they were assigned to a particular numeric level. Based on this numeric level, they were assigned particular types of books that they could read and should read, to the point where you could go into school libraries and they would have the libraries organized around these level numbers, and kids would know that they were a 504 and that's where they would go, and they wouldn't think that they could read anything else. So it's a misconception to never use leveled text. Never, never, never is a strong word, and we wouldn't use it. The problem with leveled text was not the text. The text wasn't the problem. The problem was the grown-ups. It's us again. The adults used the leveled text in ways that were not supportive of students reading. They restricted students reading, etc. So don't pick up all of your leveled texts and move them to the dumpster. Just open them up in your library and make access to them in a greater, more extensive way. I don't want schools to throw out their leveled texts because they think they're not the science of reading. We don't want them to waste valuable content for reading practice. Level text can provide some reading practice. However, students should have practice reading a range of text types, not just leveled text and not just on their number. Extensive practice opportunities and even access to stretch text. And by stretch text, I'm referring to text that's kind of challenging for them, but if they have the support of another reader or a teacher, it's a good practice so they can see what they need to do when they're reading on grade level. So let me pause for just a minute, and Sharon or Leslie, if there's any questions or comments in the text, now's a good time.
Yeah.
There's one in the chat about why you think maybe there's some pushback in the bilingual community.
Oh man, we were talking about this.
It's the $64,000 question, right?
Right.
Oh man, yeah. This is a whole webinar, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, let me just say, and feel free to jump in. Sharon, you understand the issues very well. Leslie, Michael, anyone, jump in and expand on my thinking because you know California much better than I do. But I will tell you what I know for sure. One way to think about it is that the bilingual community has often felt as though the monolingual community is dominant and has not been attentive and responsive to the needs of their students. And my guess is that they have this feeling that here we go again. The science of reading is going to dominate instructional decisions in a way that doesn't support our students. However, what I would say to them is the science of reading is your best friend. If the science of reading is applied correctly, the likelihood your child is going to benefit is 100%. The science of reading could not be stronger about applying the kinds of principles and practices associated with language and, if you will, orthography in a way to make access to reading even more available to your child. So while the idea of science may sound scary, and the idea of we're going to apply the science of reading universally may sound like your child will be left out, let me say this for sure with confidence. The science of reading will bring enormous benefit, assuming it is provided correctly, which is why I'm doing these misconceptions. Your child will benefit. Your child will not be diminished. So if you have specific fears or concerns, bring them out because we need to address them head on.
Agreed.
I agree.
Bonnie, do you want to add, Sharon?
Oh, just in my own school, we had 70% Hispanic, 28% EL, and we um, incorporated, our science of reading aligned and evidence-based practices, and just our ELs flourished and moved and read, and where 93% of my sixth graders going into junior high could read accurately, fluently with comprehension. That doesn't happen by accident. And that helped all of our readers. I can't say enough. It works with the readers.
I have a comment about this from the summit, from the Reading League Summit that was in San Diego. Something that I noticed, they had very diverse panels with different viewpoints represented. And when we had folks like Dr. Young Kim, Dr. Mishiak talking about the science of reading for multilingual learners, they were referring to findings from research, practices that have emerged from RCT studies, et cetera. And when you had folks that were more aligned with CABE, that kind of that viewpoint, most of what they shared were stories of poor implementation. What you said earlier, Sharon, that the science of reading is not just phonics instruction. There were many examples brought up by those folks of seeing science of reading implementation and kids doing 80, 90% phonics instruction. So their fear is that all their kids are going to get is learning the alphabetic code, and meanwhile, their language development is being neglected. And so that's a call to all of us to try and make sure that we're spreading the word and that we're providing high quality science of reading instruction with all those different components so that we don't reinforce these misconceptions that Sharon's talking about today.
100%.
Yeah.
There's another comment from Bonnie, Sharon, wanting you to address. She said you mentioned that some use leveled text in a way that restricts learning to read and spell. She agrees. Can you explain why that is, though?
So what I think historically what happened is that we had this one text that all children at that grade level read. So everybody read exactly the same story, which meant that it was either, it's like Goldilocks, was either too hard for some, too easy for others, and maybe just right for about 3 kids in the class. Okay. And so this had been going on literally for decades. And so the idea behind leveled books would be that all children in the class would have access to reading texts that were at their level. So that's kind of the history of it. The why it's a problem is because it was misapplied. The idea of reading text you can read is a good idea. You just don't want to be limited to only reading those texts. And the constraint on these leveled texts was that they were not linked to a scope and sequence with respect to building foundation skills. And so all of the access to building foundation skills was hit or miss, incidental, not systematic. So I would say that's the fundamental issue with it.
Okay, great. I think we proceed, and
Okay.
then at the end, if there's time, we'll address some other questions.
All right. So pour them
Okay.
on, people. Bring your questions on. We'll save a few minutes at the end.
Okay.
Oh, here's the other one. 95% of students will learn to read if provided instruction aligned with the science of reading. I'm not really sure where this came about. It could be the NCLB legislation. 95% of all students reading on grade level is unlikely, but that doesn't mean all students won't learn to read. Some students are going to be reading above grade level. Some students are going to be reading on grade level. But if we use the science of reading, the vast majority of students will learn to read. The next clarification, number 11, refers back to the question that was asked earlier. Does the science of reading generalize to students who are English learners? There's this misconception, as we identified, that reading instruction aligned with the science of reading does not benefit English learners or emerging bilinguals. The science of reading does extend to English learners or emerging bilinguals and accelerates learning to read. It's not neutral. It's not only not negative, it's not neutral. It's positive. What is the same about reading for L's and non-L's? The model of reading is the same. Skills that predict reading proficiency or risk are the same. Intervention, effectiveness, and components are the same. Now, emerging bilinguals will need additional support in oral language. Absolutely. But this does not subtract from the impact of the science of reading. Oh man, this one here, I think we're finally getting some momentum on. Is the 3-queuing system helpful to English learners? So we know it's not helpful to monolingual students, but I've heard many people say the 3-queuing system is necessary for English learners or emerging bilinguals. The answer is no. The answer isn't maybe. The answer is we don't know. That's not the answer. The answer is no. All students need to be taught the ways in which sounds map to print, how phonology maps to orthography, and they need to be able to read the words. It doesn't matter what your first language is. You need to learn that. 3-queuing is not an evidence-based way to teach English learners or non-English learners to read words. Case closed. Is the science of reading based solely on implementing whole class instruction? I've heard this one too. If you're doing the science of reading, you have to do whole class instruction. No. Multiple grouping formats. Keyword, multiple. Multiple means more than one. Multiple grouping formats are associated with improved outcomes for reading. So you need whole group, you do need whole class instruction, you need pairs, perhaps for something like fluency, you need small groups for things like reteaching, pre-teaching, providing targeted, supported practice with specific feedback. All grouping practices have specific purposes and not only can be used, should be used. Clarification number 14. Does the science of reading say phonemic awareness should be taught without print? Oh boy, I have had enough of this one. Okay, many people think phonemic awareness should be taught without print. You can do phonemic awareness with your eyes closed. Okay, let me say something really simple. You can, you shouldn't. The only time you do phonemic awareness without print is with very young children, like 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and beginning 5-year-olds. But after students begin access to the alphabet and to words, you teach phonemic awareness with print. And the research is quite clear on this. There's a misconception that phonemic awareness should be taught in the upper elementary grades and without print. No. Advanced phonemic awareness skills are necessary for learning to read. The only aspects of phonemic awareness that are associated with improved outcomes are adding, deleting, and manipulating phonemes. What does the research say about phonemic awareness? Reading outcomes are better when phonemic awareness is taught with letters. Phonemic awareness without letters is only appropriate for students who haven't learned letter names or letter sounds. So for pre-K and early kindergarten. Otherwise, why do we want to take letters and words away from kids? I cannot imagine why. Does the science of reading say that phonemic awareness should be taught without, oh, I can't even read what this, oh, without print? Why is phonemic awareness for beginning readers? Well, we know that this segmenting of sounds directly impacts encoding and that blending directly impacts decoding. Good phonics instruction naturally integrates phonemic awareness. Kindergarten, first, and second graders who received standalone oral PA did not do better than students who did not receive it. Linking it to print is the necessary component. There's no evidence to suggest training in advanced oral-only PA skills, oral only, is necessary. PA can be practiced and in fact should be practiced when students read and spell words. We really, really accelerate their progress. So hopefully that one will get some questions and comments. Clarification number 15. According to the science of reading, is a specific print approach to beginning reading superior to a print to speech approach? The idea is, or misconception, is that students should be taught using only a speech to print approach. What is a print to speech approach? That's when we teach the graphemes and leads to the sound. A speech to print approach is when you teach the sound that leads to the graphemes. Bidirectionality is important. Teach both. No studies have been done comparing these two approaches. Teach both. Does the science of reading deem it necessary for students to learn spelling and syllable division rules? Spelling is really important. Syllables are really important. Here's the key word: rules. Memorizing a pack of rules, a whole bunch of rules, is not necessary. Hold on, I ran out of water. Hold on for just 1 second. Here, Michael, finish this slide while I go get something to drink. I'll be right back.
Michael, you're up.
I'm still her student at heart.
All
Uh,
right. Never goes away.
yeah. So I was actually dialoguing with someone on chat and wasn't paying close attention, so I'll have to see what we're doing here. Um, Misconception. What does the researcher? I'm just gonna have to wait till she gets back. I don't know where she was with this. Sharon
No
Dunn, if you
worries.
want to
I
jump in
can't read my
and
mind
and talk
anymore.
for a
I used to
second.
be able to.
She's back. She can
I'm back. My mouth was really getting dry. That's what happens when I talk too much.
no
Okay.
worries.
Sorry, Sharon, I was chatting with somebody on the chat and I wasn't paying attention to you.
Oh, yeah.
He
Well, you
got
already know. You
he
already,
does detention after class.
well,
Yeah.
he already knows all this. That's the thing. What does the science of reading show about teaching syllable division rules? It's not necessary to teach all those rules. So if you're having kids memorize like 20 rules, that's not helpful. Teach them a couple of rules, teach them the patterns that go with those rules. English orthography is opaque, the rules are inconsistent, and you end up having more exceptions than you do rules. Does the science of reading say that reading nonsense words, oh man, this is a good one, is a key part of phonics instruction? So students should practice reading nonsense words. That's different. Nonsense words help students see and practice how the sounds of our language map to print. However, we don't practice reading nonsense words except as an exercise to practice blending how sounds align with print. So it's important. You can use nonsense words for assessing word reading, really good for assessment, because you can figure out what sounds they know and which ones they don't, so you know what to teach. But there's no studies documenting that extensive practice in pseudo word reading is beneficial. Some interventions that greatly improved students' pseudo word reading did not translate to improved reading of real words, and that's really important. So real words is the goal. You can practice applying what you're learning about phonics to nonsense words, and you want to have students really reading real words. So, oh, here's another good one I hear all the time. Is the science of reading about teaching the big five? So in the National Reading Panel, and by the way, the National Reading Panel never called it the big five. We made that up. They never said that. But they did identify phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension as ways to organize the science of reading. The big five message occurred as a part of interpretation of the panel's findings. So what you don't want to do is say, these are the only five things you need to do. That's a big mistake. Spelling is really important, as we talked about. We talked about writing. We talked about oral language. We talked about background knowledge. All of those are important, not just those five things. We know a lot about the science of teaching and learning. Michael and I have written a paper about that. It's not just the big five. But I'm not saying the big five aren't important. I'm just saying they're not all there is. So don't forget spelling. So what are some of the implications for practice from these misconceptions? One, teach evidence-based practices. Don't worry about buzz phrases or programs. Be sure you have the evidence-based practices organized. The science of reading is more than a curriculum. We need to think about screening students. That's part of the science of reading. Monitoring their progress. That's part of the science of reading. Improving educators' knowledge about reading development, the scope and sequence of reading. Ongoing professional development. That's all part of the science of reading. We need to provide explicit and systematic cumulative instruction in word reading and spelling, and teach phonemic awareness with print, using real words for practice. So these are some of the implications. Teach vocabulary and support students' oral language. I mean, one of the reasons many parents and advocates for bilingual children are nervous about the science of reading is when we talk about the big five, we don't talk about oral language development. Talk about oral language development. Talk about spelling. Talk about writing. Provide multiple opportunities for students to read a variety of texts. Decodable text, stretched text, a variety of texts. We want to differentiate instruction. A one-size-fits-all approach, it's not going to work. We have to customize. The science of reading doesn't tell us how to teach all children. It tells us how to teach each child. So that means we need to be thinking about the science of reading as we sit across from every single child. What are the implications for practice? Again, don't be afraid to use pictures to support reading comprehension or motivation, not to teach word reading. Practices that work for non-English learners also work for English learners. Remember that. These are universal practices that benefit all students. Think about flexible grouping based on the instructional objectives and students' needs. We don't need to have whole class instruction all the time. One-on-one, small group, whole group, pairs, all of these have use and purposeful use depending upon what you're doing. Think fluidly about the big five. Integrate instruction across components. And don't forget about, I keep saying this, background knowledge, writing, and spelling. All of these contribute to the science of reading. One of the things you should never forget is that no child is born a reader. All children in literate societies have been taught to read. We're all good at speech, but disabled as readers. We're all disabled as readers and writers. The difference among us in reading and writing is simply that some are fairly easy to cure and some are not. The science of reading applies to all of them. If we apply the science of reading, students will learn to read. It's really in the hands of adults. It's not in the hands of children. It's not that the children can't read, it's that we haven't taught them. We adults need to move the finger away from the child into us and to figure out how we can responsibly act on improving outcomes for every child. So now's your chance to ask questions and make comments and engage, hopefully, in a discussion about how we can better come to terms with the science of reading.
Tirith, do you want to do a quick photo before we do that? Because we always forget. We always want to promote you on social media, Sharon, and celebrate your presence with us. So if everybody that can will turn on their camera for just a second. Even if you're in your PJs, we don't care. We won't be able to tell. And it's fun to see your faces. Look at all of you.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing that. Okay, Tirith, ready? Got it? Okay, got it. Thank you guys. That was
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, Maria wants to know, do you have any resources for teaching reading to students with disabilities?
Oh, yeah, you betcha. Now, much like I said with English learners, students with dyslexia and reading disabilities need customization, no question about it.
Mhm.
But they are more like learning to read, applying the principles and practices of the science of reading with customization than they are like teaching other students. So we have, if you go to our website, which I'm going to put up here, we have a lot of sample lessons, sample materials, resources, all kinds of ways in which you can access sample activities. Our website gets literally hundreds of millions of downloads because we give everything away free. Go there, get some free stuff.
Excellent.
It's good stuff too.
Kristen, will you pop our slide deck back up? Because I want to, before we sign off here, I want to talk a little, I want Kristen to talk a little bit about our membership event coming up, because this is a fun thing that I want you guys to know about. So, Kristen, do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, you bet. Next month is Teacher Appreciation Month, and last year we did this event, and it's going to become an annual gig. So this year is our second annual Teacher Appreciation chapter meeting and giveaway. So we currently have probably 6 or 8 of our favorite mission-aligned sponsors. They're going to come to this meeting, and after we have our regional breakout rooms, they're going to give stuff away. Decodable books, chip kits for phonemic awareness practice, phonics kits,
Oh,
book
good.
resources. So I'll drop the link in the chat. You can register, look for it on social media. It'll be fun, fun, fun.
So fun. Every other month we have a membership meeting where different things happen. So when you're not coming to events like tonight's event with Sharon, There's also an opportunity on those alternate months to attend a membership meeting and learn more about what's happening in your area, as well as things like this where we're doing this great giveaway. So excited for that on May 7th from 6 to 7, and we're not recording, so you got to be present to win.
That's right.
So feel free to come. That'll be fun. Thanks, Kristen. Sharon, thank you so much for tonight. I think this was super helpful in thinking about how we can address some of these misconceptions around the science of reading with folks out in the field and continue to advocate for this work because I really, yeah, Tracy commented in the chat that she loves that you said to stop pointing the finger at students and turn around and point it at ourselves. That's really true. This is not a student problem. This is an adult problem, and we have the ability to solve this problem. And so it's really up to us to care enough to address things like misconceptions that are out in the world. So thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us. We
Yeah.
really appreciate it. All right, friends, have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for being here as always, and we will see you at our next event on May 7th. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.